Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's dive right into something absolutely wild right now. The massive, fascinating contrast between AI hype and cold, hard physical reality. We're living through what is arguably the most aggressive tech build-out in modern history. But when you look past the flashy headlines and actually examine the physical footprint, the concrete, the steel, the power grids, wow, a very different picture emerges. If you've got tech stocks in your portfolio, or honestly, if you just rely on cloud services, you absolutely need to understand what's actually happening behind the curtain here. So let's unpack the 2026 AI infrastructure landscape together. Let's kick things off with a truly staggering number: $100 billion. Yeah, billion with a B. That's the massive commitment Anthropic just made to spend on AWS technologies over the next decade. To put that into perspective, guys, that is roughly the GDP of an entire small country, completely dedicated to just a single cloud partnership. I mean, this isn't just an investment, it's a profound bet on the future of compute, custom AI chips, and cloud services. It sets the baseline for the sheer scale of capital moving through the artificial intelligence ecosystem right now. We are literally talking about nation-state levels of spending. So that brings us to Section 1, the massive AI expansion. Let's look at the explosive corporate announcements that are really driving today's infrastructure narrative. Tech giants are painting this picture of absolutely limitless capacity. Take Amazon, for instance. They're promising up to 5 gigawatts of compute capacity for AI training. For context, that is enough power to run multiple major cities simultaneously. Crazy, right? Then you have xAI partnering up with Anthropic to provide access to Colossus 1, which is this massive supercomputer packing over 220,000 GPUs. They're even pushing boundaries toward orbital space compute, openly suggesting that terrestrial power grids and available land down here on Earth just won't be enough for what's coming. It's a stunning, almost science fiction vision of the future. But wait, how is all of this unprecedented expansion actually being paid for? Well, let's pivot to Section 2, the closed financing loop, where we'll look at some really grounded analysis from the Man Group. Now, the Man Group's analysis points out something totally fascinating called a recursive demand loop. Basically, a handful of megacaps, your Microsofts, Amazons, Googles, and Anthropics, are essentially operating in a closed system. They are acting as suppliers, customers, investors, and validators, all at the exact same time. Imagine this. A massive cloud provider invests $1 billion into a hot new AI startup. But instead of cash, they hand over $1 billion in cloud compute credits. The startup then spends those credits right back with the provider to train their models. See what's happening? They're essentially buying from and validating each other, and that severely masks real independent market demand. From the outside, it looks like explosive growth, but underneath, it's largely an insular financial loop. And this creates a genuinely terrifying mismatch in how these projects are financed. On one side, you have private credit lenders. These are institutions that traditionally fund super stable 10 to 20-year infrastructure projects. Think cell towers or office buildings. They're sitting there thinking they're funding long-term real estate. But on the exact opposite side is the tech reality. We're talking about highly specialized data centers filled with GPUs that depreciate like fast-rotting avocados, or more accurately, like smartphones. This underlying architecture becomes obsolete in just 12 to 18 months. So the collateral these lenders are relying on is practically evaporating right in front of them, trading a supposed 2-decade lifespan for a 1-year expiration date. Yikes. Which naturally leads us to Section 3. Where are the centers? I mean, if private credit is flowing and billions are being spent, we've got to ask a super simple physical question. Where actually is the infrastructure? Tech investigator Ed Zitron points out a glaring disconnect here between Silicon Valley's claims and the real physical world. Hyperscalers, those massive tech giants dominating the cloud, claim they're rapidly adding gigawatts of capacity quarter over quarter. But Zitron highlights the harsh reality of construction. You can't just code a building into existence. It takes an absolute minimum of 18 to 24 months to secure land, get environmental permits, pour the concrete, and build a single data center. And for the gigawatt-scale campuses they're promising, it takes far, far longer. The physical world simply cannot move at the speed of software. And this physical bottleneck, it's creating a very clear pattern of delays. Let's look at Microsoft's heavily hyped Fairwater and regional projects as prime examples. Despite all of the grand announcements, Zitron's research indicates the physical reality is severely lagging behind. At Fairwater, Wisconsin, barely one building appears operational.
At Fairwater, Atlanta, the actual capacity remains incredibly unclear. And in places like Lompton, England, massive multi-million-dollar projects are reportedly just sitting there as empty scaffolding. The physical buildings, the absolute critical homes for all this computing power, they just aren't materializing at the promised speed. Which results in this absolutely staggering figure, 2 million. Because data center construction is dragging so much, Zetron estimates that up to 2 million of the 3 million newly shipped, highly advanced Blackwell GPUs might literally just be sitting in warehouses collecting dust. Now, you might be wondering, well, why not just plug them into existing server racks? Because you can't. These new AI chips require highly specialized liquid cooling systems and massive power density that older facilities simply cannot provide without, literally melting down. The chips are successfully shipping out of the factories, sure, but their physical homes, they are just not ready to receive them.
All right, Section 4, CapEx versus revenue. With physical capacities severely lagging, let's examine the massive financial gap this creates in the market.
So the core problem boils down to a massive disparity in the Man Group's data. Get this, we're looking at an estimated mountain of $200 billion in capital expenditure, chasing a mere $12 billion in actual AI revenue. Let that sink in for a second. There is an absolute ocean of spending, much of it debt-fueled, by the way, but the actual adoption curve and the revenue generated from everyday AI usage, subscriptions, and enterprise tools is just a tiny fraction of that cost. It's a massive imbalance. It's like everyone is rushing to build a railroad, but very few trains are currently paying to ride the tracks.
And adding immense pressure to this equation is a 70% drop. Yeah, the cost of AI tokens, which are basically the units of computing power you pay for when you prompt an AI model, is plummeting by about 70% every single year. This is due to rapid efficiency gains and just fierce competition among the top players. But here's the catch. This means that even as user demand grows, it isn't translating into revenue growth. The unit economics are rapidly deteriorating, meaning the industry has to find exponential growth in regular users just to tread water and maintain their current, and again, already insufficient revenue levels.
The Man Group actually maps out how this fragile house of cards could unwind, kind of like a slow-motion chain of falling dominoes. It starts simply enough. Step 1, a single major cloud provider or hyperscaler pauses or cuts their GPU orders to save some cash. Step 2, as computing utilization drops, that immense overbuild of data centers suddenly becomes glaringly visible to the entire market. Step 3, that closed recursive financing loop we discussed earlier, it fractures because the major players stop buying from and validating each other. And finally, step 4, private credit faces a severe solvency crisis, basically left holding the bag on empty buildings filled with heavily depreciated, fundamentally worthless technology. So that brings us to Section 5, surviving the AI bubble. As we synthesize all these physical and financial realities, we really have to objectively ask, who actually survives when this dynamic eventually unwinds?
The ultimate fallout models pretty clearly separate the winners from the losers here. The survivors, well, they'll be those solving fundamental efficiency problems, companies actively reducing computing costs and building highly efficient deployment infrastructure. They win because they lower the barrier to entry and can actually survive those super tight margins. But the losers, they'll be those who bet blindly on continuous linear growth, specifically single-tenant data center operators and the power production supply chain. They are facing massive risks. They risk holding stranded, unsellable assets like empty buildings and unused power contracts when the music inevitably stops. To sum up this dual reality we've been looking at today, consider this really powerful takeaway from the Man Group. They state, the technology is real, but we believe that the financial architecture built on over-leveraged bets is unsustainable. I think that perfectly hits the nail on the head. The artificial intelligence technology itself is absolutely transformative. It's highly capable, and it is 100% here to stay. But those massive debt structures and circular demand signals built all around it, yeah, those might not survive the physical reality check.
So I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought to ponder. Will the true breakthroughs and revenue models of AI arrive before the financial bubble bursts? The race between technological adoption and debt maturity is very much on. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always look for the reality behind the hype. See you next time.